I'm Eric Lipsy, and this is Gulp. Today I'm here with HR extraordinaire, Sonya Martin. How are you doing today, Sonya?
I'm doing really well, thanks. How are you?
Outstanding, outstanding.
Good.
I'm glad you're able to join us again here to talk about today. It's a little bit different topic than we talked about the last time. Today we wanted to talk about diversity in the workplace. So I'm glad that you were able to come on to share with us a bit of your knowledge on this subject. So
Absolutely. I'm excited about the conversation. Thanks.
awesome. So maybe you can start out for just someone who may not even understand what diversity in the workplace means. Maybe you
Mhm.
can tell us what that is.
Absolutely. So I think just on a very basic level, diversity is making sure that within an organization that there are individuals that represent a variety of like whether it's race or gender or age or disability status, and just making sure that the workforce is comprised of a variety or a diverse group of people. That's on a very basic level.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, why is, I know I have my own thoughts on
Mm-hmm.
diversity, and because
Yeah.
I'd always tell people if you lack diversity, you lack perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But why
Exactly.
is diversity in the workplace so important?
Yeah, I think that starting off with what you're saying, I agree 100%, which is if you have one voice at the table that is over and over again the exact same image, the pretty similar experiences, life experiences,
Mhm.
I always look at decision making. I go directly to decision making. And if you have decision makers who are of the same mindset, don't have really a diverse way of thinking, diverse backgrounds, then
Uh-huh.
when it comes to decision making, people are going to be negatively impacted no matter what.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of things that have come up, especially like returning back to site. And there are all kinds of things. I have so many examples that I can think of, but one specifically, if you don't have maybe like a mom or a head of household who has children,
Mhm.
when you are making decisions about going back into the building,
Yes.
then and that lack of diversity is going to make an impact on the workforce. And you're not going to have a person in the room who can actually relate to what it feels like the impact of going back on site. And so that's one example out of millions of
Mhm.
decisions that are made from leadership, that if you do not have a diverse group of people making those decisions,
Uh-huh.
especially in a leadership position, decisions are going to be made with groups of people counted out of the conversation, not even regarded in the conversation.
Yeah. See, you bring up an interesting point because I think when most people hear the term diversity in the workplace,
Hmm.
they automatically think race. But
Hmm.
there are so many ways to
Yeah,
have diversity in your workplace.
yeah, absolutely. I think about companies who build without a ramp, right?
Mhm.
Or companies. I remember I was in a training one time. It was a great training on. It was developers of curriculum who were trying to figure out ways that they could become more diverse. And the people who were on the initial call, we were talking. We had all these great ideas. We had a follow-up conversation, and in that follow-up conversation, there was another person who was on the call who asked. In your videos, I noticed that there's no closed captioning. Is that on purpose? We hadn't even thought about it, didn't
Yeah.
even consider it because none
Uh-huh.
of us needed it. But the person who joined the follow-up call needed it. And so that's a really great example of when you don't have people with different representations in a room, you're very likely going to miss very important parts that people need, and they needed to get their job done. They needed to feel a sense of belonging,
Mhm.
and so it just in every way. So I think diversity is important. Another really big topic for me, and I found myself in lots of diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations, probably
Uh-huh.
because I'm usually the single African American, definitely the single African American female in rooms often.
Yeah.
And one thing that always occurs for me is unconscious or implicit bias.
Mhm.
And the thing that I try to help leaders understand is everybody has a bias. Everyone has biases. We all have biases towards something or someone or a set of people or characteristics. What I always encourage is that people bring it to the front, especially decision makers, because if you don't, and by bring it to the front, I mean acknowledge it, just acknowledge this particular type of person. I have a specific issue with, maybe I can't even put my finger on why I have an issue with it. But
Right.
once you pull it to the front, you can address it. But if
Right.
you just allow it to play in the background, you are making decisions, and that's playing in the background, and you have no idea the kinds of decisions that you're making with bias playing in the background and impacting people, most likely negatively.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And another thing I just thought about too, as you were talking there, was even with what you people would say, okay, this people in this same race, so they'll represent this group or this person because that like you
Yeah.
represent the entire group with your perspective on a thing. And I think it's
Yes.
really important when people are looking for diversity that
Hmm.
they're not, because I see people so often say, oh, this is how Black people feel. It's like, no, you got or this is how the Asian people feel, or this is how the white people feel. It's like, you got the perspective of one person
Right.
and you spread that perspective to cover the entire group as if everybody had that same idea, that same mode of thinking in mind. And that's,
Right.
I think it's really important when you're talking diversity to be really diverse, even
Yes.
culturally, because a lot of people
Hmm.
get mixed up with thinking cultural. They're
Yeah.
thinking color when it's actually more culture related than it is color related. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so getting all of those different perspectives. Yeah. So go ahead.
Hmm. I was just going to say, I am the vice president of the African American Network, which is one of our resource groups within the company that I work for. And the president of the organization is an African American female. We were asked to do a workshop with a group of people on diversity, and we could choose to talk about whatever. And it was when we got into a room and started talking about what we'd like to talk about, is
Mhm.
when we realized how very completely different our experiences are.
Yeah.
She has a white mom and a Black dad,
Mhm.
and her experience, she grew up in New York, and she has all of these beautiful stories about how her family, the experiences that her family had, and transitioning out of a pretty rough neighborhood into an area where her family could do uh, a little bit better with what they were like what they were surrounded by. And she talks about that and how that formed how she leads. And then I
Mhm.
think about my life, and my life is very, very different than that. Like, I stayed in that environment. I grew up
Right.
in the environment. I didn't get to move out of it. And
Mhm.
we were just talking about all of the different experiences. And if someone were to just have me to come in and talk about the African American experience, they're going to completely miss out on a whole lot of other experiences that I have no
Right.
context. I don't know what that experience is like at all. And so
Right.
I do think that there are some similarities. We had an Afro Latino event one time, and I remember we were on a call, and I remember that it was just so exciting just to hear everybody's experiences, and we were talking about food and music. And one of the things that I think everyone shared was a different level of a love for greens, which was like, it was the weirdest thing for me,
Yeah.
because they were all like, they were from the Dominican and different places, but we were able to find some common ground. But again, very different experiences. We were just able to find common ground. But if you just have one person representing an entire group, you're probably going to miss out on a lot of experiences. So, yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
And it kind of builds a stronger work environment too. Like even
Hmm.
for outside of just the people, but even when it comes to technology, sometimes I was
Hmm.
listening to this documentary recently and watching this documentary, I guess I should say,
Hmm.
and it was regarding AI
Hmm.
and how the guys who designed the AI,
Wow.
they missed an entire,
Yeah.
it almost seemed like the AI were being discriminative
Yeah.
because they missed out on so much because all of the guys who developed the AI
Hmm.
were from similar backgrounds, so,
Yes.
cultures and things like that. So they missed
Hmm.
so much when developing that even the AI
Yes.
seemed like it had racial bias.
It it absolutely will, and I'm glad you brought that up. There are a couple of things. I can't think of his first name. His last name is, I think, Aiko, or he does the uncomfortable conversations with a Black man.
Uh-huh.
He does podcasts, and he now has a book. He talked about how, when, I don't know if it was Apple or Google, but when there was a face recognition app that was placed on phones, and there was some part of the technology that had African American people, when it would come up, it would show a gorilla. And
Uh,
it was, and
yeah.
so whoever made that, the image, something about it related that face to that of a gorilla. And those are man-made. It's data that people like to use to make decisions, but the
Right.
data is flawed because there are people who are flawed, or not flawed, but biased in some ways,
Right.
creating. And another place that plays in, and I think it's a really important part of the conversation, is I hear a lot of leaders talk about, we hire the most qualified candidate.
Right.
I hear that a lot, right? And so that's all great and fair if a couple of things are true, which is, one, you are looking for candidates in all places. You're not simply looking at specific school like Ivy League schools that may have a very low population of people of color or gender, or whatever. You may
Right.
not find as much diversity, which is why a lot of companies have, from the VP level and above, um, majority white male or white female.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just, that's a lot of the statistics. In addition to that, the thing that I love, I've read a lot of information about, is the idea that a lot of CEOs depend highly on the assessments, the pre-hiring assessments that people take in order to get a job. And
Yeah.
All kinds of research shows that there are cultural biases built into those assessments. And so African American and Latino Americans, or Latino, are always going or mostly are going to score lower on those, and may even fail those.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it is not because of an intelligence issue, it's because of a bias issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so I jokingly say, and I wish I had the intelligence to do this, but I always say, I wish we could take the exact same questions, but put them in a cultural language that,
Yes.
like, that a person wouldn't, a person who
Absolutely.
they are normally made
Yeah.
for wouldn't understand the cultural way that the question is being asked. And then
Mm-hmm.
they could probably see it a little bit better, I think.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I think you're onto something. I think that could be brilliant, if nothing else, for a
yeah,
scientific experiment to
exactly.
just kind of show
Hmm.
how. And I think a lot of times too, we have to understand that these people are often aren't racist,
No,
but it's
yeah,
just the way that they see things is
it
just
is.
so different. Because if you haven't had exposure
Right.
to culture, you may not even think that you
Yeah,
needed to have diversity
yeah,
for any reason, because you might just be thinking, "Oh, I'm not racist, so I
yeah,
I wouldn't exclude anyone."
yeah,
Yeah, it's not your intention to do that, but
at
because you
all.
lack that perspective
Yep.
from another side,
Yeah.
it happens. Kind of, it just happens.
Innately. Yeah. It is just, it's literally, and I like to call it just, it's playing in the background of decisions. And
Yeah.
as long as it's playing in the background of decisions, we're going to continue to have some of the disparities that we're running into just from an employment perspective. It
Hmm.
is just going to happen. I think companies are trying to lean a little bit more into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some companies have hired people at executive levels to run the programs, which is really good.
Hmm.
Um, we have resource groups in our company that's helpful, in that we find places that people can actually have a conversation about the impacts. Because when we look at our engagement survey scores, when we look at exit interviews, there are some indicators that there's some culture problems that they could be really addressed through addressing some of the diversity challenges. I oftentimes see comments come up about what our executive suite looks like,
Yeah.
and the representation from our executive suite. And so those are some things that if we kind of lean a little bit more into diversity, it would be helpful. I think even from an
Yeah.
engagement, from a retention perspective, it's helpful for companies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe, sis, I think you made some very good points about diversity in the workplace and the importance of it.
Mhm.
Maybe you could share with us. I don't know if there's a few specific things that are being done by some of
Mhm.
these corporations or even some of the smaller companies
Yeah.
to maybe offer a few pointers to how they can improve on
Mhm.
diversity and and inclusion.
Yeah, so thank you for asking. I think that if a company can hire someone at an executive level that specifically focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion, that would be, I think, the primary ask. I think from people, in that that person really is not bogged down by their normal job. They're literally focused on that effort. And some companies, if they look at the the statistics, the data that comes from their company, from engagement and such. That is the solution for them. But there are some companies that's not going to be, they're not going to do that, which, there are other options. There are opportunities to have someone maybe at a lower level, maybe a director, maybe a manager, but that is their sole job. Their job is to make sure, like for instance, we have our resource groups, to have a program manager who can build a bridge between us and the executive team. That's helpful. To have resource groups,
Right.
that's a good step in the right direction, where you have a place where people can feel a part of the organization. That's huge. And I think the last thing, because I'm in human resources, but I'm in a very specific area of human resources, which is learning and organizational development. That's my space. It's where I
Yeah.
live, and I focus on helping leaders kind of improve in whatever areas they need improvement and organizational improvement. And so for me, the more education we have, the better. The more
Right.
we know,
Absolutely.
the more we know, kind of
Absolutely.
what not to do. And so for me, the more that we can just strategically include diverse conversations and diversity in all the things, everything that is employee facing, there's diversity in what people see. Because if you have, like we know from a culture perspective, culture is not only what we put on paper, but it's also what people see on the wall. So if you are
Right.
endeavoring to be a
Right.
culture that is diverse, then
Right.
people should see that diversity.
Right.
And if they see it on the walls, then they should absolutely see it in leadership.
Right.
And so one of the challenges that we have, as I said before, we have an African American network. We were looking for executive sponsorship. There's no one above the director level that is African American. So we ended up having to get allies to be a part of our executive board, which I'm fine with
Yeah.
for the time being. But that is an indicator of a problem that we definitely need to look at and consider solving. And so but that's another thing, having allies, because one of the things over the last year that I think has been the best gift, maybe that even though there was a very negative season politically, it was a negative season culturally, it was, and then with all of the stuff that was happening, one of the things that I remember when I was incredibly exhausted and people wanted to know what they could do. Being in Colorado, there's not a lot of African American people, but people wanted to know, like non-African American people wanted to know, what can I do? I was exhausted and did not have the bandwidth to have those conversations. I couldn't
Right.
I
Right.
couldn't process my emotions and be an expert at the same time.
Yeah.
And what I found is that there were allies who were really saying, hey, tag me in. I'm going to read books. I'm going to read articles. I'm going to become a person who is a resource for people. You mourn, like you do what you need to do. I'm going to be a resourceful ally. And I think companies need that as well. Companies don't need to just look at these groups as the primary resource for all of the information, but I think leaders need to read, and they need to watch podcasts and
Right.
become knowledgeable, so that not only are the people who are representative of the diverse groups are knowledgeable, but leaders are knowledgeable as well. So I
Right.
think all of those things would help with companies who are really trying to do something in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now belonging. Belonging is a part of it. I think justice might be coming, like, how keep adding a letter. So it's diversity. This is
Right.
diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and I think justice might be something that is being tacked on now. But yeah, those are things that I think would be helpful.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, those
Mm-hmm.
are very great points. And I like how you talk about the allies too,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the things I realized is that you wouldn't have been able to reach out to those allies if
Right.
you weren't open to having relationships outside of your
Mm-hmm.
immediate circle.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I recognize that they're in a position where they have a voice. They are at the table. I'm not at that particular table, and I'm fine with that, but they are. And
Right.
if they go and they represent us and what we need, then it's fine. We can absolutely work in that. So yeah, that works too.
Yeah. And another great thing you brought up, a really great point that I like, where you talked about the just pictures on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Because you'd be surprised on how sometimes the smallest things, or
Mm-hmm.
even the most simple things,
Yeah.
can make a person feel
Yeah.
at home, or make them feel
Exactly.
welcome, make them feel like, give them a sense of belonging. And,
Absolutely.
and those are really important things when you're trying to get that engagement and you want people to take ownership of the process of their
Mm-hmm.
work. When they
Yeah.
feel like, hey, you know what? Oh, I can walk into a place and they're representing multiple backgrounds and cultures and races,
Yes.
things like that. It just gives you a thing of it within itself.
Hmm.
Just seeing that would be kind of an expression of inclusion,
It
where
is.
you're welcome. We want to see more people. We respect
Yes.
all different backgrounds of knowledge and wisdom, and
Absolutely.
yeah. So I think that's
Yeah. It's a sign of intentionality, and people want to see that, and not just on the walls, but in if you have documents that represent your company, brochures, if you have training that you're developing, and then not just having the photos for photos sake, but leaders who are in a wheelchair,
mm-hmm.
leaders who are,
Oh, yeah.
like making
Right.
sure that you're very particular about how, like, and I think that's there are activities that I've been a part of over the years that help you kind of identify some of the biases that you might have. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was listening to a story from a good friend of mine, and it was painting this picture of an event. And in this event, this individual was getting on a bus, and they had really bad attitude, and then they were dropping things, and then they were kind of being curt to people, and then the bus driver was saying certain things, and then there was another person, an older person, who got on the bus. They were behaving a certain kind of way, and so you go through all of these things, and then you kind of talk through your thoughts about it, and then the question is asked at the end: what race did you see this person? Like, what gender did you see this
Yeah.
person, right? And it begins to kind of peel away some of the things that are playing in the background, like, and then maybe question, why might you see this person with this negative behavior, that particular race and that particular gender?
Right.
Why might you see the bus driver, whatever race or gender you saw, right? And so it's a
Absolutely.
it's a good activity to just kind of
Yeah.
take an introspective look at how we see the world.
Yeah, I completely agree with you because it's something innate within us. We all have these
We
perspectives. And
do.
from the time you see anybody, I don't care who you are, you can be the world's nicest person.
Hmm.
Oh, I'm not racist, I'm not clean, and I'm
Yep.
not talking about any particular color. It's
Yeah.
a psychological fact that it's a defense mechanism. When we see
Yes.
someone, we automatically start trying to size them up
Yes.
to see whether we feel safe being around this person, whether this person's going to
Yeah.
try to harm me, that sort of thing
Yeah.
starts processing through our heads. And if we've already developed in the back of our minds
Hmm.
that this person is this, a person who looks like this is this way, a guy who wears his hat backwards, a guy who wears a
Yes.
hoodie, a guy who, dresses in a
Yeah.
suit, a guy who, it might not even be their color of their skin. It could be the way that they're
Hmm.
dressed, or their length of their hair, that
Yes.
automatically start
Yeah.
sizing that person up. And like I said, we all do it,
We
but
do.
learning to be able to see those things and then be able to
Hmm.
step back and say, you know what, let me process this
Yeah.
before I go down this road and put this person in this box that they don't,
Yes.
and
Before I make a decision
yeah.
about them. And another thing, even before we see people, I was listening to something the other day, and there's a young lady, she's African American, her name is Karen, and she had a coworker named Chantel. And they went into the field to do something for their company. And Karen is from London. And so she has
Mhm.
this beautiful accent, and and Chantel she's a white woman from Texas with this very specific Southern
Yeah.
accent. They went in the field, and the people pulled the Chantel, the white woman, to the side and said, "We really thought, we completely thought that you were Karen." And they thought that the other lady was Chantel. Even the fact that they pulled Chantel to the side, this white
Yeah.
woman, like, they could have told both of them, "Wow, we really thought both of you were the other person. It's shocking," but they didn't. And
Yeah.
so even before, and that's another problem in hiring. I think even before people see a face of someone, or see or get to know the person, even before, like, unfortunately, sometimes being African American, if you have a name that is very specific to our culture, that
Oh, yeah.
people, or at least people, believe it is a cultural name, then
Mhm.
before we even get in a room, there are judgments that could be
Oh,
made.
yeah. Absolutely.
And so,
Absolutely. They said
that is
some
a
people don't
challenge.
even get in the room because
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
name didn't fit
Yeah.
the bill. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you think
Totally.
because of whatever's programmed in your mind, and I think that's why it's so important
Hmm.
to just kind of almost brainwash yourself,
Yes.
allow yourself to, like, what, the thought may come, but to
Right.
be able to intelligently counter that thought with
Yeah.
some logic and say, okay,
Yeah.
well, just because I have this in my head, that doesn't mean that that's what this situation is.
Yeah.
So let me open my mind up to be able to give this
Mm-hmm.
person a fair shake. And I think,
Yeah.
in diversity, and the more people you're around too,
Yes,
that are
exactly.
from other cultural backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
from other, because I remember I used to judge like people who were in gangs, and I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
that's the way to go or
Yeah.
anything, but
Right.
from my perspective, I grew up on a farm in Alabama, so I was
Right.
around that sort of thing, but I
Yeah.
didn't understand that some of these guys grew up in cultures where if you weren't in a gang,
Yes.
you're basically your chances of survival by not being in a gang
Very low.
were worse.
Yes. Yeah.
So and
Yeah.
that once I understood that, like I said, I still don't think it's necessarily a great thing, but I
Mm-hmm.
understood it better to where
Yeah.
I can relate to people better in those situations as opposed to judging them. I now
Mm-hmm.
understand their background a little bit more, of where they're coming from and why they may feel a
Yeah.
certain way or may view me a certain way
Mm-hmm.
because of their exposure. And I think
Yes.
if I had never talked to the gentleman who was from that background,
Yep.
I would not have understood that. So
Absolutely.
having that diversity, like I said, lack of diversity is lack of perspective, right? It's just,
Yeah.
it comes back to that.
100%.
Yeah, the
I
more
agree.
you get to talk to in different backgrounds, you're like, you know what? When people are like, oh, white people are this, or oh, Asian people are this, I'm like, no, they're not all that. Because
No.
I know that because I have several friends who are in all
Yes.
of these different categories, and they don't all feel the same as
Mm-hmm.
because they don't all think the same, and they don't
It's
all
true.
act the same. It's
Mm-hmm.
the reality of it. And I think that having that
Mm-hmm.
diversity helps you understand, helps us
Yeah.
understand that better and be able
Yeah.
to take each person, as I guess Dr. Martin Luther King said,
Mm-hmm.
at their own character, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's something to be said. There's something that you said earlier. There's something to be said about interrogating your own thoughts and making sound choices out of, like, once you've looked at it and you've kind of, okay, I thought that, but why did I think that?
Right.
Based on what? Is that true, or is that feeling?
Right.
Like, and really interrogated thoughts. I think that the
Mhm.
more, it's a very mature thing to say we
Yeah.
should do, but
Mhm.
it's a really responsible thing to do. And I do agree that the more that we kind of diversify the group of people in our lives, and maybe we don't have to have best friends that are diverse, but we should
Right.
have people in our lives that don't look like us. We should have people in, like, that we associate ourselves with. I know when I moved to Colorado, my tribe became these like old white women. I joined a writing group and I couldn't believe it. I would go to this writing group and we had so much in common from the space of writing. Like,
Mhm.
we were all very, very focused on getting our words on paper and that kind of thing. And I found kind of my tribe. And one of the things I think was helpful, and I did hear from a couple of them, for them to actually meet someone who was African American. A couple of them had never met or never been around a person who was African American, and would have never known that we actually had a lot of things in common. I would have
Right.
never known that,
Yeah.
right? So, and
Absolutely.
that's to me the value of diversity. It's the value of creating a world that kind of knocks down some of those walls, if not all of the walls that divide us. I think
Yeah.
it's not a healthy place to be right now or
Yeah.
ever.
And
Yeah.
I tell you one thing that consistent, regardless of culture, regardless of
Mhm.
race, everybody wants to feel important.
Uh,
Everybody wants to feel respected,
yes.
regardless to who you are. And I think
Yes.
we can only improve ourselves
Yeah.
and improve our work environment
Hmm.
by by allowing people to feel that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Now, if only, I think if leaders and decision makers can bring the value of what you just said to the place that they place, the things that they place value in. Like, I know that there's a lot of things I think leaders don't necessarily see. There are statistics, and I did not pull them, and I apologize about that. But there are statistics that
We'll do something
show. One more
again.
time.
We'll do another one.
Yes, absolutely. There are statistics that support having more diverse groups allow for more innovation.
Mhm.
There are statistics about females and leaders and the difference that these companies have seen in production, like the things that I think leaders look at, the numbers, all of these things. There are benefits of having a diverse environment, and so sometimes maybe talking that language might be helpful to leaders, so that they can see raise the value that they believe diversity, equity, and inclusion
Yeah, absolutely.
makes in their company. Yeah.
Yeah, because some of them can't see the importance unless they can see it on the bottom line.
Has to see it on. Yep, I agree. I agree completely. And we can speak to that.
Yeah,
We just have to make sure that we have the right information, have the right conversations, and really just um, I think that it's important as well. Just one of the things that I'm learning, just because I'm in these conversations quite a bit now, not even intentionally, but one of the things that I've been coming to realize is a lot of the work is done individually and internally. Like for me, I have to kind of comb through my ideals of diversity, and I have to comb through the things that I even say about myself, right? The things that I like, the issues that I have, so that I can actually speak knowledgeably to someone and win someone over with the idea that they should consider this topic. I have to kind of really work on myself, and that's a big deal. Like I was talking to someone, and I'll close with this. I was talking to someone about the Crown Act, which is this wonderful work that's being done about how natural hair is occurring both in school and work environments, that kind of thing. I struggle with that individually, and that I personally have a struggle with wearing my natural hair at work and viewing it as professional. So if it starts with me, then I have to I have to become clear with how I feel about it, and I have to become okay with it before I can help someone else think that it's okay. So something as small as that.
But you bring up a very good point, because sometimes we develop our own perspectives that we
Yes.
start to see things. Like I said, it's not just one
Yeah.
side of it. It's like there's people in everybody don't feel the same way. There's somebody
Yep.
who's like, oh yeah, I'm ready to go out there and do this thing, and then there's the next person
Exactly.
like, oh, I don't know if that's very professional to have that look, you know. So
Exactly.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I completely get where you're coming
Yeah.
from, and that's why sometimes when I talk with people on the issue of everyone feeling the same way about certain perspectives, and I'm like, you know
Yeah.
what, that is not a
Mm-mm.
white perspective. That is not an Asian
It's
perspective. That is
not.
not a black perspective. That is someone's individual
It
perspective that
is.
someone projected onto everyone else. You
Exactly.
know?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's really important, because, like you were saying, even though you could benefit from maybe, hey,
Hmm.
I want to try a different style of with
Yes.
the workplace, but in your own mind,
I have
you
to
don't
start
feel
with me.
comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. So it's a work. It's a work for all of us. And I
absolutely.
think every work starts with us individually.
Yeah.
Everything that we're like everything that we're up to, every place we're trying to grow, it starts with us individually.
Absolutely. And I think it's big when you can admit that, because a
Hmm.
lot of people try to deny
Hmm.
that they have those things. And I think when you can look at yourself and say, you know what? Yeah, my
Yeah.
perception, this is what it is. It,
Hmm.
whether I recognize it as flawed today or tomorrow, but that's what it is. And I'm open to
Yes.
that I could do better in this area. So that's
Absolutely.
outstanding.
Yes, absolutely. It's the work we all have to do.
Well, thank you very much again, Sonya. This has just been an absolute delight. I mean, seriously, I'm so glad you were able to come on today. I got a lot out of this
Me
conversation.
too. Me
Hopefully your
too.
viewers will also. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. The
Nice.
conversation I felt was very healthy, and I appreciate you for just inviting me to the platform. I really do. I appreciate it a lot.
Well, we appreciate you being here as always. Your mind is sharp. I enjoy the conversations for sure. Now, if anybody else wants to reach out to you outside of the platform, I think you mentioned LinkedIn.
Hmm.
Uh, they can look for you there. Is
Hmm.
it just on the Sonya Martin that?
Yep. You can just find me at Sonya Martin, LinkedIn. I'm Sonya, Sonya Martin. And yeah, reach out if you have any questions.
All right. Well, we like to just keep you exclusively on our channel, but I know your knowledge is something that so many people need, that if other people can reach out to you, then it's gonna, without sounding cheesy or corny, it's gonna make the world a better place. I
Oh,
truly
thank
believe
you.
that.
That is my
Yeah, yeah,
intention.
yeah.
I appreciate that.
Well, until next time, this is Golf.